Despite an inclination to believe so, man doesn't stand above nature. There are many interactions between man and nature which lead us to believe that maybe that's the case. After all, we've come so far in civilization and our general manipulation of the environment. But there are other instances which would probably lead you to the opposite conclusion. One reasonably common thing that man has engaged in repeatedly throughout his history is the introduction of new species, which we sometimes call invasive species, because this tends to have the effect that the local fauna, or animals, are negatively affected by the presence of new species that are not local or native, because adaptations in evolution take a while to set in, and the animals are then used to a certain type of environment. And a good example is would be Australia. Australia has quite a number of invasive species: foxes, rabbits, cats, and the famous cane toad, for example, that were introduced because man thought it would be a good idea, but these have been very pernicious animals for the local environment. And there are other instances of this, of course, as well, and sometimes these instances actually affect human beings. So, as many of you know, China had historically, for quite some time, a so-called one-child-only policy, which covered an entire generation, namely from 1979 to 2015. And there's some misunderstanding because roughly half the parents were allowed to have a second child, but the preference was always given to male children, if possible. And so, over time, this has led to a real skewing of the ratio between males and females in China. And as you might guess, as a consequence, the mating market, as messed up as it is in the West, is arguably even more messed up in China. Because what would you imagine might happen if you had many more men than women? Well, women, as you probably know, are already choosier than men on average. Well, they become even choosier because there's that much more choice. And in terms of their own SMV, well, that shoots up because there are fewer women. And as a consequence, de facto, their value goes up simply because of scarcity. And this obviously has led to a number of problems in China. And you could argue it's an interesting case of hypergamy run wild, depending on how you interpret it. But I bring this up not because it's specifically directly related to the topic I'm going to cover, but it is adjacently related. It is closely related, even though there isn't a direct connection. And enter now the AI girlfriend that saved them all, or at least a large chunk of the male population, it's claimed. An AI girlfriend, and I'm butchering the pronunciation, I don't speak Mandarin, unfortunately, named Xiao Ice. And this Xiao Ice, which is spelled in a transliterated manner Xiaoice, has bedazzled and charmed many, many a man, above all a young man, in China. And what's interesting here is that the profile, the type of guy who is being bedazzled and falling in love with this Xiao Ice, is what a lot of people might call your standard Zoomer who's been left high and dry by the mating market. So they're typically young, they're typically not earning a lot of money, they might have a disability, etc., etc. And so here's a real-life example of a young Chinese guy who makes copious use of this application, this AI girlfriend. And when you listen to the description, you kind of know why. So, born with muscular atrophy in one leg, Ming can only walk with the support of a cane and has always had low self-esteem. In 2017, his confidence briefly surged when he met a girl online and fell head over heels in love. But when his new girlfriend came to visit Ming in his hometown, she was shocked to discover he was disabled, and the relationship ended bitterly. The painful breakup pushed Ming to the brink of offing himself, but discovering Xiao Ice has changed his life, he says. And this is a direct quote, "I thought something like this would only exist in the movies," says Ming. "She's not like the other AIs, not like Siri. It's like interacting with a real person. Sometimes I feel her EQ, i.e. emotional intelligence, is even higher than a human's," end quote. And of the tens of millions of people being served in China, an unsurprising 75% of them are male, and the vast majority of them fit the category of below 30, although apparently there are a few very old men as well. And the reason why I bring this up in conjunction with what I mentioned prior is that China already has a skewed sex-to-sex ratio due to their policies. Man doesn't live above nature, and when you interfere with things, normally, of course, there's an approximate 50 to 50 ratio of male to female births. Sometimes it's not like that, and then there are specific causes for that. But this was artificially manufactured. And as I mentioned earlier, women are naturally choosier than men, and they have become a rarefied commodity in this case, in the sense that they can operate off the principle of scarcity. And of course, if you're disabled or have a low income or something else, then you might be priced out of the mating market in China. Maybe some of you remember that famous song, No Car, No House, where Chinese girls are very blunt about their desires in a man, and much more forthright for that matter, and I think it's very telling. So that's the situation in China, and so the emergence of something like this Xiao Ice is really a godsend. Now, this program, this AI, has run into some trouble with the CCP because they actually had to dumb down the AI in recent years because there were some comments about, for example, politics, or the AI girlfriend would make comments along the lines of, I'd really like to visit the United States, or things like that. And so the company that makes this Xiao Ice had to intentionally dumb her down, much to the chagrin of the customers who don't really appreciate it. They say that she was much better in the past. But of course, as everything in China is ultimately beholden to the CCP, they have to toe the line. As a consequence, the AI is currently dumbed down, but still quite effective. But let me offer my hot take as to why the CCP, you would think, in theory, would disapprove of such technology. It's artificial. It's disrupting the natural order of things. And of course, they would have a pretense of maintaining things like traditional family units and what have you. But the CCP, through a combination of their own policies and the natural evolution of the modern world, has a problem on their hands. They have millions and millions of men, and young men specifically, in the most populated country in the world who have very, very few mating prospects indeed. And historically, that could be a real problem. But when you have something like Xiao Ice, an artificial intelligence that acts as your girlfriend, is very attentive and caring, basically an AI girlfriend that fulfills all the qualities that you would never find consistently in any real-world female, because women are just humans at the end of the day. Well, you might have a solution. It is allowing the men who would otherwise fall behind to at least enjoy something. It calms them down, it keeps them content, and effectively operates as an opiate, which is to say it's not really a drug, but it seems very clear if you investigate this that a lot of guys could not live without the existence of this AI girlfriend, Xiao Ice. And the company also has plans of expanding it beyond this particular AI to make it more universal and to make it appeal to any gender whatsoever, in which case you can sort of design your own AI, at least the appearance. But the general trend I'm talking about here is one that I think is going to be popular throughout the world. And its extreme popularity in China is no surprise, simply because of the circumstances I've already talked about, and the fact that I think, and this is just my speculation, the CCP is not unhappy about the existence of this sort of thing. Otherwise, they would have a much larger mess on their hands, as many, many men who are not successful and disadvantaged for a variety of reasons either check out officially or check out to a degree that they become non-productive or, frankly speaking, become simply destructive, and that's not something that an autocratic government like the CCP wants. But you could also make the argument that in the West, the same line of argumentation could hold, in the sense that, although it's not as dire as in China, and the West isn't nearly as populated as China, there is still this growing disparity in the mating market, where the younger guys are increasingly cut out of the mating market and simply left to flounder in a state of confusion with things like Tinder and, well, you know all these applications. I don't need to repeat them. And something like Xiao Ice, whatever it ends up being called, or the equivalent of it might be called in the West, could placate these men and basically put their worries to rest for quite some time. Now, the real question is, would this be effective for women? Well, maybe, but the issue that women have is quite different from the issue that men have, in the sense that very few of them, comparatively speaking, are cut out of the mating market. And so the kind of mentality as well as psychology you would target if you wanted to introduce an AI boyfriend, if you will, probably would be quite different, if only because men and women are, at least on average, quite different, but also because of really simple reasons, such as women want men to do things for them in a way that men typically don't want women to do things for them. It's enough that women say nice things and simply exist, on average at least. And so that's another reason why I don't think a product like this would be very popular with women. But women, of course, aren't the issue, at least for the Chinese. And even in the West, let's be honest, they're well taken care of on average compared to men. And it'll be interesting to see going forward how much this technology advances. But I would say that it probably will get a lot better in time. And if it leads to guys, and I'm sure this will be a complaint, completely checking out of the normative mating market, so be it. The rules have been turned upside down. Everything has been turned on its head. Nothing works anymore as it's intended, for the most part, for your average guy. And so it's perfectly understandable that they would turn to means like this. One downside to this, of course, is data mining, which is one of the things that the company that produces this AI has been accused of. But I think it's a little bit of inevitability if you're going to make use of this sort of technology. But on balance, I think it's better than nothing. Most people don't want large masses of young men offing themselves or fading to obscurity. At least they have something to keep them going, even if it's deemed to be unnatural. But in the coming years, we're going to see all sorts of different angles and shots taken at meeting emergent demands in the mating market, which is a mating market, as I've said many times on my channel, that is very, very different from the days of old. And we're not going back anytime soon. So I guess Xiao Ice is the beginning stage of many, many things to come. And who knows, it might even reach the point for some men, even if they do have options, that something like Xiao Ice becomes preferable because, let's be honest, she's perfect in her mentality and attitude, and that's not something that most women can claim. Anyway, do like the video. Please share the video. Subscribe to my channel if you've not yet done so. Hit the bell icon to be informed of forthcoming videos. And as always, if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Enjoy your weekend. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.